Hello, welcome. How's everybody doing out there? This is the Helping Friendly podcast on tour. My name is Brian Brinkman, producer here at Osiris Media, and happy November. Happy November 1st. Hope everybody out there who is still in Vegas, coming home from Vegas, en route, wherever you may be, I hope that you are all happy, healthy. I cannot imagine that you are well rested right now, but that will come. That's what this week is for, and really excited to start to hear more detailed stories of what it was like for people at the shows this weekend. Just an amazing run of fish that we're going to get into here in this episode, which will is going live right now, and we will release this tomorrow as a podcast as well. I'm going to bring on a very special guest, someone who I love talking about fish with, pretty much my favorite person to talk fish with, and that will be RJB here in a second to run through his experience at in Las Vegas this past weekend, his thoughts on just a mind-blowing Halloween set. I cannot wait to get into this. We haven't said a word to each other about this, so I'm really excited to hear his thoughts, and talk through just kind of where we're at going towards MSG, Mexico, and whatever is on the horizon for fish in 2022. Before we do that, I just want to tell everybody that we are presented by Shift Genuine Cannabis. Please visit shiftcannabis.com for all your cannabis needs, especially here in the state of Colorado. Amazing company. They brought us back midsummer 2021. We've been doing these recaps, these daily shows, as well as weekly shows, all because of Shift Genuine Cannabis. We did a live show in Dick's, just did a couple live shows in the Brooklyn Bowl in Las Vegas, did a live show in San Francisco. None of this possible without Shift Genuine Cannabis. So thank you so much for all your support, and lots more to come from Shift Genuine Cannabis and HFPod on tour here going forward. Also want to give a big shout out to our media partner at Jambase. They've been huge supporters of Osiris Media and huge supporters of what we do here, and from a larger source material in terms of jam band culture, jam band music. Not a better place to check out than jambase.com. So please visit jambase.com. Great writers, great thinkers over there. Awesome stuff happening. We love them. Really would encourage anyone out there listening, share your comments, share your thoughts, share your theories about what happened last night. We'll try to tackle as many of them as possible. But before we do that, I'm going to bring on the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. RJB. How are you, my man? You're muted right now.
That's about how it goes.
There you go.
Just looked in the camera and was like, wow, this is what I look like. You look more rested than I do, even though you spent several days with your kids by yourself. So
it's the lack of travel, I think, is all that it is.
Yeah.
But you're looking great. You look like you're in an excellent room. You look like someone who's like got that glow of 4 fish shows, or 3 fish shows on you. It's amazing.
Yeah. Intense, man. Last night was crazy. I mean, we kind of knew it would be. We did these live events, as you know, yesterday and the day before, and nothing that any of us said was right, as usual. We did say fire, and there was a little fire, which was cool. So it was nice to be right about fire. But man, crazy run.
We'll get into it here. I mean, I feel like fish, you get this every so often where it feels like they just throw everything at a single run. And at the end of it, I don't know what other songs there are songs left on the table. Down with Disease, Everything's Right. There wasn't like a You Enjoy Myself. We got the lone You Enjoy Myself at the tour at the Forum. But like, I don't feel like had they had another show or they tried to play other songs, like it would have not that it wouldn't have made a difference, but they threw everything at these shows, from gimmicks to jams to really weird set listing structure. Obviously the second set from last night that we'll talk about, but like, I feel like I can count on like one hand in the last 10 years, 10, 12 years, moments where you walk away from a fish run and no matter what they played, it feels like they played everything. Like Dick's 2012, Magna Ball, parts of the Baker's Dozen. What were your kind of larger thoughts on the run as a whole?
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about those songs that they didn't play, but you're right. There's a lot. I mean, last night I was with our friends from No Simple Road during the third set. I went up and hung out with them, and it was so great. Aaron really wanted to hear You Enjoy Myself, and I kind of figured that was going to happen at the end of the third set. I told them they're either going to encore with Hood or You Enjoy Myself. So
Mm,
we were, you know, but there's so many songs left, but it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't
right.
matter, you know. The Saturday night show was interesting because I think I did the Fish.net review, and it's sort of like thinking that through. They kind of did the gimmick kind of superseded the music, I think, on
Yeah.
Saturday night, you know, which is fine. Like it doesn't matter, right? It's still great. But last night was, man, I mean, it was the first set was one of the best first sets I've ever seen. I couldn't believe the Ghost, right? Third song.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of like expected a buried alive ghost,
Right.
was going to happen at some point, right? And at some point in the song, I don't know when, maybe 20 minutes into it or something, or 15, whatever, Trey like stops, and it sounds like they're going to do something else, and then they're like, actually, let's just keep playing the song. They're
Yeah.
just, I don't know, that was indicative to me that they're having a blast, and they're having so much fun. So yeah, the songs, like you said before, it doesn't matter what songs they play. It's just fun.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because the one show where it seemed to matter what songs they played was Saturday, and
Yeah,
I feel like you're right. The theme superseded the music in a lot of cases. It felt to me like a show length version of the Wait joke that they used to make when they were playing in clubs, where they play just like a riff and then kind of just pause and go, wait, wait, we'll get that right. And then play a riff again. And like they do it to a point where like the audience would start to be like, we get the joke. You don't need to
yeah,
keep doing that. But because they're fish, they're just going to keep doing it. And I felt like at the end of the first set, I was like, okay, I get it. It's an animal themed show or animal
yeah,
themed set. I don't know if you guys need to play another animal song, and they
yeah,
just like double down on it, and it
yeah,
worked perfectly when it comes to the Harpua and the reveals that
yeah,
came in Harpua, but it also felt like a show length distraction to almost get people to think, well, they're going to play Animals tomorrow by Pink
yeah.
Floyd,
Right.
which
The prediction game is always a losing game, as we've discussed. I don't know. I'm just like, we've talked about this before, but I just feel like the creativity and the fearlessness is really like on display, and I think during the second set last night, it was clear, like, I mean, who knows how long they've been practicing these songs for months and months and months,
right.
right? They seem totally, there was no hesitation, lack of confidence. They were just like, we're playing our new album.
Well, let's dive into it because normally I think we would step back and try to approach this run
Yeah.
from show one, but like what you just said resonates with where I'm at, and it gets me really excited to hear what your thoughts are on this record because everything I heard in this album musically sounded like what we've been hearing from an improvisational
Yeah.
standpoint throughout the summer. And
Yeah.
whereas, you had moments like that in Wingsuit, for example, where like when they played Fuego, there's that like drum beat where it sounded like a part of there's a Chalktus Torture from Dix that year. But I remember that like had that kind of rhythmic nature to it. But I remember listening to those songs and thinking, okay, perhaps the style or the way that the band has been improvising has informed the way they've written these songs, but they're very standard forward thinking songs. I
Yeah.
don't know of any Halloween that sounds like the previous year more than this,
Right.
where you
That's
can
a good
hear
point.
those sounds bleed into whatever they wrote.
Yeah. Even 2018 didn't really have that, at least in as pronounced of a way, for sure.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, like there were moments, but it was a lot of those songs stand kind of on their own just as songs. These
Yeah.
felt like they plucked ideas out of jams, or
Yeah.
whenever they wrote these songs, they informed the jams. Tell me kind of overall, what were your impressions of the second set, and we'll kind of dive into it.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I thought about is like every song was like, okay, so this is like a new Martian monster, but slightly different, or this is like an updated and better version of like something else they played on Halloween 4 years ago, 3
Right,
years ago.
right.
I think people on the internet are like, there's obviously debate about whether this was like good or not. I mean, I think that to me, not to like, over generalize, but like, these songs will evolve, right? They'll
Mhm.
grow and they'll become part of this repertoire. So I mean, the songs themselves were interesting. Like, I don't really remember most of them. They were just like playing a bunch of stuff that I'd
Yeah.
never heard, and it was fun. But anytime they play new music, whether it's like original stuff, like the Everything's Right or Blaze On, like back in the day, like once they start playing new music, it fuels a whole new stage of creativity. So apart from the like, are these songs good or not, like they're gonna keep pushing them forward, and it's gonna push the band forward, like it clearly already has.
Yeah.
um so the I mean, to see like a band 35 years into their career come out on stage in Las Vegas wearing helmets and playing like a whole new album of like psych rock song. I mean, it's insane. The whole thing was nuts. But I think the songs are solid. I mean, they seem a little bit more in the like Casbah Vox area, right? Like there weren't.
Hmm.
This is not like Tom and Trey writing like deep, meaningful
Right.
songs together. It's like,
Right.
you know, done for Halloween, and then they'll turn into whatever they turn into. So I had fun. I thought it was great. I thought I think the first song was the longest
Yeah.
jam, and it was great. Like I don't know, I didn't hear a lot of variety throughout the songs. I don't know if you did. Like I feel like they were all kind of like you were saying, they all kind of were going in one direction.
Yeah. I did a re-listen this morning, and there's something overwhelming about hearing your favorite band debut 12 new songs. We got it, every time they've done this is now the fourth time that they've said Halloween is now a new album. They've literally
Yeah,
written 4 new albums in the last 8 years and debuted them all on a single night
just for
on top
Halloween.
of other music that's come out.
All
It's
the
just
other music.
absolutely insane.
None of it makes any sense.
No, this their creativity has no bottom. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. I think aside from Chilling Thrilling, like this feels more of a part of that. It feels somewhat like Casvote Vox in the sense that there's like a North Central European vibe from the 70s and 80s that's like rooted in sci-fi in a really strange way. This feels like a double down on that while also double downing on the like thematic jamming and groove driven approach that Chilling Thrilling had. But it definitely felt all these songs feel like a part of themselves. There wasn't a song aside from the closer, I'm in Miami, that felt very different from each other. And that's
Yeah.
okay because a lot of these songs to me sounded like they were either informed by or informed the improvisation that we heard throughout summer and fall. I kept
Yeah.
hearing moments where I was like, that sounds like this version of Ruby Waves. That sounds like the Simple from Dix. This sounds like the Simple from Deer Creek. There were so many moments
Yeah.
where I was hearing that aspect of the band. My biggest takeaway beyond that though was I felt and I heard a lot of odes to their biggest influences. I heard King Crimson,
Hmm.
I heard Gabriel Aerogenesis, I heard Yes, I heard Pink
Interesting.
Floyd. And where I think a lot of people are coming down on is this good or not is at the root of it. And this is kind of what makes Fish so interesting. They can emulate their influences and the people that they've long loved, but they're still Fish. Like at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's still ridiculous that a bunch of 57-year-old men are wearing space helmets on stage and singing self-referential lyrics about Sleeping Monkey and
Yeah.
writing like what sounds like almost Mad Lib style lyrics that remind me of Wombat, but across a whole
Yeah.
album type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like on the one end, I felt this last night on Twitter, and I felt it this morning hearing people's thoughts. Is there's either a view of they didn't go far enough into it because at the end of the day they're Fish, and that's like they're still going to have that goofy nature, or it was too far into it
Hmm.
and it wasn't like quote fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think like long term these songs are gonna linger as really good grooves that almost will remind me of like Death Don't Hurt Very Long in the
Yeah.
sense that I don't
Yeah.
know how many of these songs are gonna last as like the length that we've heard them, but I think a lot of them will kind of inform jamming going forward as you were talking about.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I mean, this is for people who write and talk about fish like us. It's not great for us because like this all is very hard to describe at this point. Like you kind of summarized everything just now in a good way in terms of their influences and stuff. But it's like, the whole weekend was just about them keeping us confused, and that's like
Right.
part of the fun. So like it's hard to not end up at just like, I don't know, it's just fun to go to these concerts and see what they'll do. Because there's a certain like, you do it, a lot of us do it. We like, okay, so tonight's gonna be the night we'll hear X, Y, and Z songs. And like if you don't, that's fine, but you kind of like there are patterns, right?
Sure.
Right now there are like no patterns. I mean, none of it makes sense. It's really hard to like wrap your head around. I think we did these, the events we did this weekend. I think all of us said we were confused like multiple times. Benji and the rest of our team. It's so crazy. But I think the music itself it's almost like you said, it's kind of like going backwards. Like
Mm.
in terms of influences. Like that was much more like 60s, 70s influence, whereas like
Yeah.
Cast Fox was like a little bit more, 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, do you think that they're listening? Do you think Trey in particular is like listening to a lot of King Crimson, Pink Floyd? Like, do you think or do you think that's just like part of their musical DNA that's just part of them? Because it's clearly coming through.
Yeah. I mean, I think that question gets to the heart of like an endless debate that we'll probably never understand from the band is what is intentional and what just is spontaneous and just happens.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I've got to imagine when you think about the last 20 months of all of our lives, when there was no live music, when there were no sports, there was, nothing really to entertain us in the spring and early summer of 2020. I think a lot of music fans, I know I did this, just went back into our libraries of music
Yeah.
and said,
Yeah, that's
"What do
true.
I listen to? What do I explore?" And I wonder, someone who's already listening to so much music like Trey, how much of that period in time was spent hearing music he either hadn't heard in years, maybe decades,
Yeah.
or just spending time inside of other bands' heads. And I think about like, Lonely Trip, there's a lot of really weird and complex songs on that record. And,
Hmm.
for whatever people think of like Forward People, it's a very composed, strange song. Um,
Yeah.
Page made this very weird, isolated synthy record based off of a trip to Iceland.
Yeah.
Mike
Yeah.
is constantly saying, "How do I take 8 different songs that shouldn't be combined and figure out a way to combine them?" And then,
Yeah.
Fishman's drumming is just at another level right now. So, I all of that to me leads to what was the music that got them into music
Yeah.
originally. And we've
Yeah.
talked to Tom a lot about this, about like the time that he and Trey spent sitting in friends' basements, listening to early Genesis records, listening to Yes. Um, I think you're right. The Casvo Vox stuff felt to me like the band starting to think about their past and kind of recreating what would it be like if we found this album that influenced us, that came out around the same time, but the band never made it.
Yeah.
And this stuff, that we heard last night, Get More Down, which is a really good album title for Fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounded to me like they took a further step back in time and said, how do we figure out a way to, intentionally or not, take our influences and apply them where we are right now without covering a Genesis record, without covering Yes? How do we recreate this based on where we are as a band in 2021?
So, well, first of all, everyone watching, thank you for tuning in. Post comments because I want to hear what other people think about this
Yeah,
because this is
please
like,
do.
you know. But I think one thing about the influence, so the prolific songwriting of Trey in particular, but like you said, Mike, we heard like Mike has a new album, Mike has a lot of new material. They're all obviously prolific musicians, but the fact that they, instead of just like covering an amazing album like any of the ones you mentioned, they wrote another 12 songs, right? I mean, Trey's written 50 songs, maybe more in the past year since the beginning of the
I've
pandemic.
lost. less complete. I mean,
I
you
mean,
go back to
between Lonely,
2013 and they've like introduced 80 songs into the Fish
it's
canon. It's
amazing, and
insane.
like I said, I mean, obvious point, but like it really, really, really adds to the repertoire, and I think pushes them forward improv wise. I think what we saw this summer and this fall in terms of improv is directly because of this album, right?
Yeah, I'd agree
I mean,
completely.
so if you're like on the internet and you're really pissed that Fish did this album, then you got to look at the last 5 or 6 months of Fish and realize like that's where it all came from. Like
Yeah.
that's a connection that to me seems pretty clear. Um, it's interesting. I wonder if there's like a little bit more looking back nostalgia in terms of songwriting. Like I'm sure you've listened to the new War on Drugs record that came out last week. Like
Only a
that
dozen times.
is it's such a clear like Springsteen. There's a Springsteen line to that record, and it's like
Yeah.
bands are. I don't know. It's like it's okay to go back and like pay homage to some of these artists that have influenced you, and I feel like that's what we heard last night. Tim
Yeah.
Wheaton said, how do people react? I mean, the thing about going to these shows is like at least from my perspective, like it's really hard to find someone who's not having a complete and total blast at a Fish show. Like I don't think people are. I mean, last night during the second set, everyone was just like having a great party. I don't think anyone was like analyzing the music and like, is this the right thing or wrong? Like in the moment, it doesn't matter. You're just having fun and happy to be at a concert. I didn't really like. I don't think people really. I think the playbill, that I haven't read it yet, but like it's like pretty. There's a lot of content in there. It's like a
There's a lot of
whole comic
layers to
book.
this thing. Like the band
Yeah,
literally, like they thought this out from a storyline standpoint, from a overall, from
so silly.
setting, from like everything. They put so much thought into it. I mean, I'm curious. The only Halloween I've seen was Kaz Vote Voxed, and from my experience, that was really well received. A lot of those songs had kind of a indie rock like hooky
Yeah,
nature to them that I didn't hear a ton of from previous Halloweens, and we didn't hear a lot of from a lot of like recent Fish songs. Um, and I seem to remember the venue was loving it, but also like you said a couple minutes ago, like these are 10 to 12 new Fish songs. It's kind of hard to process that and be at a concert. Like there's a lot going on
yeah.
mentally. I know that last night, like I posted something about my thoughts on the show, which I basically summarized a couple of minutes ago, and our good friend Brad Tenbrook just responded with total dance party. And I was like, that's like the contrast between like sitting on your couch and thinking like, okay, what is the band doing? What does this song mean? What am I hearing here? How do I communicate this? And someone just at the show being like, dude, I'm just getting down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is kind of that's my perspective too. I want to can we put up this comment from Little
Yeah, I
Tokyo?
like this.
Sorry. Um, so alternative reality of that. Yeah,
I think I agree with this. Like this was partially what I was saying. Like it sounds like Fish tipping their cap to their influences, but also it's all going to be filtered through Fish.
yeah,
It kind of gets back to that comment that Trey made in Bittersweet Motel, where he's sitting in his truck saying, there's aspects of the Grateful Dead I love. There's aspects of Boston that I love. Like I'm informed by music that I heard at the mall in the
yeah,
1970s and 1980s. All of their influences are ultimately filtered through who they are, which is not where their influences came from. And that's personally what I hear when I heard this record is a band channeling the music that they love, which
yeah,
is inherently weird, it's inherently rhythmic, it's kind of absurdist, it has a groove to it, but the groove is like rooted in this more like mathy approach to rock and roll. There's like a prog
yeah,
nature to it, but at the end of the day, it's a band that highlights their drummer in a dress playing a vacuum cleaner multiple times a tour. Not really this tour, but like multiple times a tour. And that's like a thing about Fish that none of their influences really do. Like Fish
yeah,
utilizes humor in ways that sometimes aren't very funny, but are inherently funny because it's Fish in a way that none of their influences do. I don't know. What are your thoughts on
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, yes, yes. I say yes to all
Yes.
that. I do think there's Justin Bruce just asked a question, which made me reflect a little bit more on the. Sorry, Brian, you can do that. Which is maybe they were listening to a lot of this stuff and actually going back and thinking about it and paying. I mean, it's clearly paying attention, and there's certainly like a feedback loop that's getting to them, through various channels, right? They're like, they know what we're talking about on the internet, not us personally, but people. So that's definitely getting to them. But I also just like, I don't know, I don't really see Trey as someone who would like sit down and listen to the Allman Brothers anymore. I feel like he's like
Right.
so forward looking that I don't know. It's interesting to think about. Just like go and like put on Eat a Peach and just fucking kick back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets back to kind of what we were talking about. I think of two thoughts. One, I think there are so many licks that are just ingrained in Trey at this point in time.
Yeah,
And I think Mountain Jam
true.
licks are like, he's played that so many times. Think about stylistically, like the choices that he was making in late 2019 after playing Layla. He appreciates that era of classic rock because that's his childhood, in the same way that you and I appreciate, like, hearing Alive by Pearl Jam,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
if we were playing in front of, if 20,000 people were showing up to watch you and I play music and create an album and wear spacesuits, I'm sure that we would play a lot of like late 80s, early 90s, rock licks.
yeah,
So I think it's like ingrained in Trey. And I also think, in a sense, like it goes back to just like a theory I have, that the pandemic probably pushed him to listen to a lot of these records that are from his past that he hadn't listened to in some time. And so I
yeah,
think there's part of that. I feel like Eat a Peach has entered Thriller, Animals, these records that every fan wants to hear them play and they're never going to
yeah,
play.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's just like an ongoing joke for them.
Yeah, like the 2013, right? The night before Halloween or the show before Halloween. That was
Right.
like, definitely happening.
They have
Definitely
to
happening.
be playing. There's no way they can't, because they just did an incredible jam off of Mountain Jam.
Yeah. So my friend Gerald, who's watching on Facebook, hey Gerald, it was
Yeah.
nice to hang out with you the other night. I was hanging out with Gerald in the aisle next to his seat when I encountered this unfortunate individual who kept like getting in my area and would not leave me alone, and it was very invasive. And so Gerald, sorry I didn't say bye, but I had to like go back to
You had to just
work.
get out of there.
But the timeline. So we
Yeah.
interviewed Trey for Alive Again started those in March, and he didn't say anything about Halloween, in those interviews, but we talked about wingsuit. We talked a lot. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, as you know, that didn't make it onto the podcast. And he did say something about Halloween and not what they were going to do or what they weren't going to do, but I forget exactly what he said, but it was to the effect of like, this is how we kind of think about this thing now, and that made me think that they were already planning it. So that was 6 months ago.
Well, and there was a
Do,
Fishman interview from, I think, late June, early July,
mhm.
where he talked about them rehearsing, but not rehearsing for tour, rehearsing for Halloween.
Yeah, yeah. So this has nothing to do with curveball, right? Because there was like, remember the disco ball, and like there was like a curveball thing that never happened, but I think that's
I
still
think that
never
turned into
happened.
Casvote Vox songs. I think a lot
Oh,
of
that
those
was okay.
initial
Okay.
grooves, like Turtle on the Clouds, We Are Come to Outlive Our Brains, Play by
That
Play,
was okay.
a lot of those initial grooves came out of segments that were written for the disco ball set.
Yeah.
Um, that will pour one out for Curveball, the festival that, what a weird, what a
Oh,
tragedy.
what a weird tragedy. So at least since the beginning of the year, probably they knew that this was happening.
Yeah, and I think the way it works in my brain, and I think it'd be very fascinating to hear how it's different from how it works in the band's brain, is they got together, started writing these songs, found that these songs were informed by new equipment that Trey and Paige in particular were playing in a new leveling up that Fishman had gone through from a drumming standpoint. And because they were never going to give away the album, like there was no way they were ever going to give this album away. It's kind of the beauty of writing a new album is there's no real chance of anything leaking or any fan being like, you can have fans that say, "Oh, that sounds like Mountain Jam," or "Oh, that sounds like Pink Floyd's Animals." But like, if they're not going to play those albums, they don't risk giving anything away months in advance. That they could almost use the sounds that they discovered and just jam off of them throughout summer and fall and see where that led them. That's what makes sense to me
Yeah.
24 hours after the fact. I don't know if that's entirely true, but that's kind of where I'm taking it from right now.
I like that. I like that. I mean, we should talk about the run in general a little bit because there's so
Yeah.
much good music. I do want to say this follow up comment from Gerald that the guy got kicked out after bothering everyone else. That makes me feel good because that was really lame. So I missed the 28th, but that was like, I mean, the 28th and 29th were both really, really amazing shows with a
Yeah.
lot of revisiting potential. There's a lot to go back to.
Yeah, without diving too deep into it, because I think we could probably talk for the next 2.5 hours about just the 28th and 29th. Opening with 2001 was, it felt like a statement of itself. It was the first time since 9/22/99, and instead they took what was just an exciting opener and jammed it for 16 minutes, which seemed to be both connected to what we've heard throughout this year, where anything can jam at any point in time. You know, we'd been hearing that in lead ups to the show, the Chula Vista Fluffhead, the Santa Barbara Pebbles and Marbles, but it just felt like, wait, you're going to jam 2001 to open up your Halloween run in Las Vegas? Like watching the stream, I mean, my wife texted me from the show and was just like, it is so loud in here right now, like 6 minutes into 2001.
That's so great. I mean, do you think that they did the numbers obviously, which I think that was a perfect execution of an elaborate prank. You know, it worked perfectly. Do
Yeah,
you
I
think that
would
they
say,
were
and I didn't think they'd ever be able to do this, but it worked on the level of the Fuck Your Face show, where the set
true?
list
Yeah.
matched the plane, matched the gag in such a perfect way.
Well, so do you think that they were going to do something Friday that they decided not to do, or do you think that we're going to just like, do you think they woke up Friday and were like, actually, let's not do the animals thing tonight. Let's do that tomorrow. Let's just like play a regular show because it's kind of a funny choice to like do, Thursday, Saturday, and then like Friday, or is it just like an amazing show?
It's a good question. I don't know, but my interpretation is that they had worked it out that Friday or the Thursday and Saturday were going to be the gag shows, and that part of the purpose of Friday was to play a normal fish show,
Mhm.
which nothing's normal now, but to play a normal fish show that would almost throw off the scent, where coming out of Friday, midway through the first set on Friday, you were like, wow, this is a great show. But clearly there's no theme. Whatever they did on Thursday, who knows if it has anything to do with Halloween. It was just kind of a good way to get people just listening to a fish show again and thinking deeply about the music rather than about like what are they trying to say. And then they come out Saturday and they're like, actually everything has to do with an animal tonight.
Yeah. I mean, the 1999 2001 was just, man, that was so perfect and just worked so great.
You know?
I really loved the 29th. I thought the whole show, I mean, you know, this is kind of like what happened to us in San Francisco with Frankie Says, right? You get a
Yeah.
21-minute Axela part two. It's like, of course, like I definitely thought that was happening. And then it did. The Saturday show was interesting. I mean, I saw my first versions of a lot of songs, but
Wow.
if they hadn't done the themed show on Saturday, I think it would have ended up being like a Saturday night show where like they're kind of searching through stuff, trying to like find those spots of improv, which is interesting because it seems like this tour, at least almost every show, it doesn't seem hard for them to find those spots. But Saturday, I don't know if it was like in service to the thing where they were like, all right, now we need to play another animal song, but besides the Your Pet Cat, Runaway Jim, Piper kind of segment, there wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot of improv. But like we've talked about, that's like, I mean, you kind of had the same thing at the Forum, right? I mean, there's probably more improv there, but it's like it all those things have to happen in order for the things that we want to happen. If that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And I think, there's also, I was texting with a few people about this during Saturday's show. Like, look, if Fish wants to play first sets like they've been playing this tour for the rest of time, like I'm on board. But, and there's not a downside to this, but like, I, I find myself just like extremely overwhelmed and confused by set break every single night. And I feel like the only way to describe these shows as someone who, comes on camera to describe Fish shows is just to speak in hyperbole. And
Yeah,
I have the hardest time. Like I walked out of the Chula show just like feeling like my jaw didn't work. Like I couldn't actually put into words what I had seen. And that's an amazing feeling. But it was kind of nice to watch Saturday's show where it was just like, here's a song and
yeah,
here's another song.
yeah,
And yes, these are all tied together as animals, but like
yep,
beyond that, what does it mean? So it was kind of a it was an interesting experience to be like, oh yeah, this sometimes can be what a Fish show is like, where they
yeah,
just play songs and you don't know what
yeah,
they're gonna play, and you're not seeing the same show as last night or the same show as the next night. But I don't know. I part of me thinks they, like I said earlier, it was a very fishy thing to do to say, yeah, we're just gonna own the bit for the
yeah,
entire night, even
yeah,
though you're all going to get the bit
yeah.
by 3 songs in. And we probably don't need to do this any further, but we're just going to do it
Just gonna
because
do it anyway.
we're just going to keep screwing with you guys.
I think Big Black Furry Creature from Mars, that was the point where like I was just watching them and I haven't seen that song very much. I mean, it's like if you're listening to a live show, I don't know, like I always go through the whole show and listen to it, but like that's a
Yeah.
song that like I can definitely do without that song on listen back, just because it's like, it's fine listening back, but during that song on Saturday night, you could see them just having so much fun, like knowing that they were like Trey in particular. He was like so pleased with himself for like pulling this prank on the audience. And like during that song, just because it's so silly and ridiculous, that's where I like looked at all of them and was like they're loving this. They when they know something that we don't, that's like really special for them. I think there's it's interesting. Trey's talked recently a lot about like the importance of the community, right? We've heard him say that over and over, right? Like they feel like they're part of this community too. They just happen to be up on stage, and I do believe they feel that way. And I think like something like Saturday where they have this thing that it's just like playing a prank on your friend. It's like super fun, and once they get it, like everyone laughs, and they've been doing this forever, but I feel like now, probably partially with technology, partially with like the way this community has evolved, like they love to they like treat us like we're part of an
Yeah.
extended family. You know what I mean? Like I think
Yeah.
that's how they think about it, and I'm sure that Trey and Tom have been playing pranks on each other their whole lives, right? So
Right.
like we're
Right.
in on this with them, and I don't know, when you see those moments where you realize that you're like part of this with them, it's pretty cool.
I want to highlight a comment that speaks to that. Courtney Johnson said, if anything they do fails to translate, it generally ends up in a net gain. The fact that they continue to take the risks says so much. I could not agree with this more. Like, this is
Yeah,
the fact that we're sitting here trying to understand what happened while also knowing that we're going to continue listening to this band, and that
yep,
whenever they play these songs off this new album, it's going to feel a toss back to fall 2021, the Vegas run, this Halloween show, while also being an evolutionary step forward. And that you can all but guarantee a year from now, there's going to be some gag, some joke, some prank that none of us can predict that the band is going to play on us, just like has happened in every other year of Fish. And it's going to add that much more to this experience that is really hard to communicate outside of the Fish community, and is partially that's part of the reason why, like, you have to be in on all of these jokes that level up year after year after year to really be to get the most out of it, you know?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel like at the end of the day, I was thinking about this during Harpua. It felt like a throwback Harpua to the early 90s where you had all this mixture of mathematics and space and Gamehenge theory and riffs on this song and Trey and Kuroda like coordinating in terms of like when the lights are going to come on during the story. And all of it leads up to, a moment where everybody checks their phone at a fish show, like the ultimate do not do this,
Yeah.
to see what is Fish going to play tomorrow. And it's just like another element to the prank. Like, I don't know, there's just so much in there
Yeah.
that the band is thinking about in terms of how they want to communicate where they're at in their career, but also how they want to just like interact and have fun with us.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, there's like a level of fearlessness that the band has, which is, I think
Totally.
it's probably a lot harder than we think to like go out and play concerts in front of thousands of people every night and like think about whether those people are going to have a good time and are you going to like do a good job, like any of us when
Right.
we do our jobs, right? And the fact that they just go out and they're just so confident, and I think that that comes from taking risks. Like I think you take risks, they work, that gives you more confidence and you keep pushing it forward. So this is it's a pretty cool time to be a fan. I can't like say enough, like this is just outrageous,
Yeah.
35 years later. I like I saw my first show in 95, right? So that's 26 years ago. There's no way if like after that show you had said to me, in 25 years first of all you'll still be seeing this band and they'll be doing things that you don't expect. Like that's just it's so rare, I mean, it just doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. I mean, I often think like the fall of 95. I often think that Fish could have walked off stage on December 31st, 95, never played another show, and we'd still be talking about them. And
Yeah.
we'd be talking about them as like a 90s relic in the way that we talk about like, Pavement and Nirvana and, a lot of like indie rock and grunge that came up through that period in time. The fact that they've lasted, I always go back to Coventry. I was 19 years old at Coventry. I was seeing my seventh and eighth Fish show. Um, and I was like I'm still in college and I'm about to lose like my favorite band, like a band that has meant at that point in my life, like I loved music, but I'd never discovered a band like Fish. And I felt like I was just understanding the band. And then they break up. And I remember just like walking away from the stage that night, just being like, I don't know what the rest, how am I going to find something that is this meaningful from a musical entertainment standpoint? And then they come back and they go through this like rebirth, regroup, like they set the foundation again and they rebuild from it. And it takes, a number of years to get back to a level where people are like, okay, this is comparable to where they were. But in 2021, the idea of them making an album like they did or presenting an album like they did last night, it makes me feel so grateful for their health, their friendship, their ability to um continue to find new avenues of creativity and communication and their ability to, just walk out on stage with the confidence you're talking about and present that to their fans, knowing that even if there are parts of the community that don't like it, parts of the community that love it, we're going to trust the risks that they're taking. And we know that, like Courtney said a couple minutes ago, those risks end up in a net positive no matter
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a good time to be a fan.
Yeah.
I think the just going back to the what we talked about earlier. I mean, this is none of this is possible without this album. I'm looking forward to re-listening to it a bunch of times because the Deer Creek show and the Nashville show and the AC shows. I mean, that's all fueled by this creativity, which is really cool. I want to go just back to last night.
Yeah,
So I guess Trey was playing a BC Rich guitar. A
apparently he was.
BC Rich Mockingbird is what it's called. It's weird
Yes.
because it sounded exactly like his rig, which I guess is maybe the point. But I wonder if people out there who know more about guitars like that, we could ask Ryan. But to me, like it sounded like his normal rig.
Yeah, I was following Amar Sastry, our good friend, on Twitter last night, and he joked around that he was going to send a little snippet of one of the songs from last night out to people and say, "Man, doesn't the Languedoc sound so great?" And then when they came back and said yes, he was going to say, "Well, actually, your life is a complete lie," because he was playing on a BC Rich Mockingbird, um, which I laughed at like 11:30 at night more than I should have. But um, I've got to imagine he spent so much time refining what this guitar would sound like within his current rig. Um, there were moments where it felt like unique. I mean, I think that when we hear these songs again, he's going to obviously be playing them with his Languedoc. It's kind of similar to the Casvote Vox. He played that with a Strat, and then all those songs are played with the Languedoc. So there's like a sound to Casvote Vox that when you hear it in the album, and then you hear it Fish playing it months, years later, it sounds slightly altered. But I thought it was really impressive that he was able to get that much sound out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how any of that works, but they definitely pulled it off in a way that was, also entertaining, 'cause, the colors and I actually was slightly surprised that there wasn't more production. Like it's interesting, they haven't really done that in Vegas since 96, I guess. Like actual, like you think of Vegas, there's, dancers and
Yeah.
trapeze artists and thousands of people here who would gladly go and make a show. It's interesting, like the pyrotechnics and the lights that all worked well, but I wonder if that's like, I mean, I assume that's just like a much bigger production than I think it is, but it's also like a New Year's kind of thing usually, not a Halloween thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know like the costs associated with it. I was talking with a buddy this morning who made a comment that like what you're saying just kind of strikes back to it, where he was like, think about it, there are bands that do complete tours based around the stage setup, pyrotechnics, the set list that Fish does or Fish did last night, and Fish put everything into one show,
Yeah,
and in true Fish fashion, there were things that didn't work.
yeah,
There were things that could have probably been more, emphasized. There were probably, but like they threw everything into one performance and that's it. It lives there, and we will only hear those songs in, you know, a standard, and I say standard in quotes, a standard Fish show going forward. Um, it's same thing with New Year's Eve. They're gonna whatever they're working on for New Year's Eve is gonna happen one time, and it's the type of stage production that could be done across a 25 show tour that they did night after night after night and perfected and elaborated on, but instead like they put everything into that one show. It's an amazing feat of both creativity and also risk taking and also like an acceptance that like that's it and we're walking
yeah,
away.
yeah. Do you think they're gonna like this is kind of a I think Halloween is sort of like a reset in a way. Like they're gonna, come away from this and then there's, a few more shows at the end of the year. Do you think that this will just continue? I mean, it's kind of an obvious question, but like do we continue to hear the same kind of songs and the same kind of like I mean, everything's so disorienting in terms of song choices and set lists and like all that. Is it just going to continue?
I was thinking about that last night because this record reminds me of at least in first glance, of Story of the Ghost, in the sense that they wrote all these songs and recorded all these songs based off of this singular sound from 1997. And whenever you hear Ghost, whenever you hear Frankie Says, whenever you hear the MoMA dance, like that's probably the best example. You're literally hearing 1997 Fish packaged in a singular song. And how cool is it that these sounds that we heard from the very start of tour, the simple in Arkansas, for everything anyone wants to say about the Arkansas being slow, being sloppy, being in Arkansas, whatever you may want to say. that simple previews everything we're about to hear from Fish musically. If you go back and listen to it, it's only like 14 minutes, but there's moments you get into where you're like, wow, that is all, this jam, this jam, this jam, the weird jamming throughout every set, the Halloween set now. Uh Now we have an album that takes those sounds and has condensed them all into songs. And so every time we hear these songs, however long Fish plays, we're going to be hearing 2021 Fish. I think the cool thing will be now, how does, because the band's going to keep trying to evolve. They're probably going to come out for MSG with some new tech that they're going to try to incorporate. Some of it may not work. They're going to come out next summer. They're going to come out in Mexico with new tech, and some of it may work, some of it may not work. Some of it that works will sound totally different because that's where their head's at that point in time. But every time they play these songs, it's going to be kind of a launch pad into whatever the band was doing in 2021. So to summarize, like, my thought right now is, if there's any historical reference we can go back to, it's how did 1997 turn into 1998, where suddenly summer 1998, you're hearing songs off Story of the Ghost that are song versions of jams from the previous year, and how those changed the band and how the sound evolved in a different way. Like, the focus the band had coming out of 97 was not funk. It was more minimalism. And it was, how do we take this approach that's very democratic and reduce it to as simple of an approach as possible, which is where you get like the ambient jam. It's where you get the groove based jamming of 99 and 2000. Hopefully this has more legs than that did. At that point, by the end of the decade, the band needed a break. I don't really see Fish needing a break right now. Like, they just,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I don't think so either. It's an interesting, yeah. I mean, I think that all makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's all part of the same, cycle, right? Of new music and how that bleeds over. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask the people watching, just send us more thoughts and comments, because we've talked a lot, but I'm curious what other people think. The the main thing though is, like, go see this band if you can. It's really fun, and they're really good, and that's kind of my summary.
that's it.
It's pretty elaborate, but been thinking about that for a long time.
You put it out there perfectly.
Yeah. Where do you think this stands in terms of Halloweens?
I mean, I certainly think that this is, without showing any cards, I've thought a lot about Halloween recently. And the thing that I take away the most from Halloween's is how the band at their best applies it as a way to kind of force a change, or force them to evolve in some ways. So to me, having listened to this record twice, once live trying to figure it out, once this morning, um I have it with like Casvo Vox, Chilling Thrilling, Remain in Light, in terms of a record that will will force a singular sonic change for the band in a lot of ways. But in some cases, and I don't know how this is going to go over when I say it, but like, I almost think that they took as big of a risk last night as they did when they played Wingsuit. Like,
Yeah.
think about how ridiculous they were in freaking spacesuits with helmets that had like lights blinking on them. They're like 60 years old. They sound like they wrote like lyrics via Mad Lib. Like, they went
Yeah.
all in
So
on
ridiculous.
this,
The whole thing was so
and
ridiculous.
it could have just failed miserably.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
everyone could be like, what the, like, to have that foresight and to have that confidence, like you were talking about, to say, we're going to do this and we're going to own this completely. I don't know, like, that to me is what they did on Halloween 2013, where they said, we're going to completely change how we approach Halloween, and we're going to present you a new album, and you may not
Yeah.
like it, but this album is going to, the approach here is going to inform and help us change and evolve as a band. I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
agree? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's hard to, like, you mentioned the last 3 Halloweens, and this is probably going to continue. They're going to keep taking taking this creativity and using it to fuel other parts of the tour. It's just kind of how Trey approaches music based on what I know. There's not
Right.
a lot of looking back. It's like, what's the next thing, and that's the next thing. I mean, it's totally absurd. We've talked about it a lot, but like it's completely um it's just completely silly. Like these guys are almost 60. They're on stage wearing space suits and helmets and playing original music, and there's like fire in the background. I mean, looking at some of the pictures, I was on Mike's side, and I had a pretty good view of the stage, but I couldn't see them up close. So looking at like
Yeah.
Renee's pictures from this morning, it makes it even more silly. Like it's so
Yeah.
fucking silly. Like you see Mike and Trey with their spacesuits. I mean, it's just like whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, this is they're going to keep doing things like this, and it's great, and I'm so like happy that they're doing it, and that we get to hang out with them. It's just so
Right.
silly. They
It's
must
such a good
be.
journey.
I'm pretty tired after 3 nights. They must be exhausted. Like I feel like this must take so much emotional and physical energy out of you to try to pull this off and then actually do it.
Yeah, the only thing I have to think with regards to that is that they are catered to, or they have like a set schedule from the time that they wake up until the time that they go to sound check and then go on stage, that like is almost like an athlete in that standpoint. Whereas like
Yeah,
you and I on a run are like, well, I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to go out and have some lunch. I'm going to go and see these people, and all those things like take a mental toll on you leading
true,
up to
true.
8 o'clock at night when the band walks on stage. Whereas I think there's a lot of isolation that
That's a good
uh,
point.
that they're going through. But really simple question before we go. We've talked about like trying to wrap our brains around like deep
Yeah.
meaning about where Fish is at right now. Did you have a particular jam from this run that like just stood out for you, and that you were in the zone, like the RJ zone where the arms are up, where you got a just ridiculous smile on your face, where you're jumping around, where you could hug everyone around you? What was that jam?
I think for me it was probably the Axilla from Friday night. Just because it
Yeah.
was so absurd to find yourself in that spot. Um, that and the Tweezer from Friday night were my two kind of highlights musically. I thought last night was one of the best first sets I've ever seen. Like it worked really well. There was
Yeah.
like the Ghost was incredible, but the Friday night show was just kind of everything you would want in a show. Like there's some unpredictability and some really really deep exploration, songs that you wouldn't expect. So that's that's where I'm going back to.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I mean, I tweeted it out at the time. Like when I was a lot younger listening to Fish, I would write like dream set lists out,
Hmm.
and none of them ever came true until like fall 2021, you
Yeah,
know? And
yeah,
like the reality of like, we're not only going to play Axilla 2, which is a song we retired in 1995. So we're going to bust that out, and then we're going to play it again, but we're going to play it for 21 minutes because it has this great outro, and we know that we can jump on this and turn it into a jam.
yeah,
Um, and I think like to that point, like Friday's show, I'm just looking at the set list for what was the only Fish show of the run that didn't seem to, at least to this point, have any clues or any hints. It was just a Fish show.
yeah.
It's a pretty perfect Fish show.
It's pretty great, man. I mean, going the Brad and I all weekend were just reliving Sigma Oasis, which was toward the end of the show, and it was just such a great call after that like whole journey of improv and the walk away after that. I mean, it was like the way they ended it was just it was a perfect show. Um,
Oh,
that's the way I feel about it.
that's it.
Um, I, I do want to. Can we show this comment from YouTube? It's
Yeah.
interesting because thanks for tuning in. Didn't live up to the expectations. I think there's something. I think these songs have to evolve. I mean, Casfa Voxed was kind of perfectly executed from the start. Like that
Yeah.
show is an album, right? I mean, it became an album. It's like that's these songs felt a little bit like they do need some more time. I think. I'm sure we'll hear a couple of them over the New Year's run, and they'll probably be different, slightly different and better.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of fairness in this criticism, and we were talking about it a bit ago. I'll just highlight it again. Like I talked with a couple of close friends who love Fish who were not feeling this album last night, and their rationale was very similar to this. Was when they saw the comic book, when they saw the setup, inherently your expectations are going to go to a certain place of, oh my God, Fish is going to play this style of music. And I don't think you can fault anyone for expectations. We all talk about going into Fish shows without expectations. Every single Fish show I go to, I kind of want to hear something, like that's just like that's like human nature. And I think like my rationale for why I loved last night was that they were going for something that they're never going to get to because they're Fish. And it's ultimately filtered through who they are as artists and as people. And so the sounds that I heard them going for, they achieved to a certain degree, but at the end of the day, like they're still singing absurdist lyrics that are riddled with kind of like wink wink jokes that you kind of don't want in some of these songs, but also like that's Fish. At the end of the day, like that's who the band is. So I don't disagree with P Sarge here. I that's just kind of like how I interpreted it. Was it's always going to be the band like reaching for something that they simply can't attain because they're not any of these other artists that they're trying to be.
Yeah. I mean, no disrespect to any of the bands who played shows on Halloween last night, but a lot of them did. And I think every single band that plays a Halloween show did like some kind of cover thing, right? You cover a band or it's a themed cover, show. Like hundreds of bands did that last night, right? It's really hard to imagine another band covering themselves and playing completely new material. I mean, it's just a totally different level of songwriting and confidence and musicianship and everything else. It's outrageous. So that's
Yeah.
like, it's hard to wrap your head around, but we're like deep in it. So I don't know. I think some like time reflecting on it is going to make that even more clear for me.
Yeah, and if we know anything about Fish, it's that we're going to spend the next 2 months trying to figure this out. Someone inevitably is going to re-listen to this album and post something that they just heard to Twitter, and it's going to lead to a conversation. And all of this is going to lead up to their final run of the year, where they're going to at some point play one of these songs for the first time, and it's going to then become a part of the larger Fish universe. And this moment in time is going to evolve with wherever the band goes from here.
We'll keep talking about it. We're going to keep talking about it.
We will keep talking about something. I mean, this it's just like fodder for us to have discussion.
It's so great.
Well, RJ, this has been
Yeah.
a total pleasure breaking this
Yeah,
down.
it's
I
been
know that
fun,
you've
man.
got to fly back to the East Coast and
Yep.
reimmerse yourself in parenting and family
Something.
life after 2 weeks of. I'm really glad that we got the shows that we got at Dick's, that we got the San Francisco show that we got. I'm really glad that I got the Phoenix, Chula, LA run that I did. I'm really glad you got Vegas. Like, I think
Yeah.
when you think about where we're at, November 1st, 2021, you think about where we were a year ago, the idea that not only did Fish just debut a brand new album of crazy sonic experimentation, but we got Fish shows that like I'll cherish for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
That was completely unexpected even 6 to 8 months ago. So
Yeah.
I feel really lucky right now, just looking
Yeah.
back on the last 2 months of music that we've heard, 3 months of music
Yeah.
we've heard.
Totally. I agree. And I think it doesn't make for great content, but like we keep saying the same things, which is like, we really appreciate where we are. So that's like, I'll just keep thinking that. Thank you for doing this. And thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope it lives up to people's expectations. It's like, it seems easier than it actually is for me to articulate what's going on with this band right now. Like yesterday, the Fishnet review I was writing, it took me a long time. So I was like, I don't really know what to say, which is kind of part of the beauty of it,
Well, and just to keep listeners guessing. I mean, we have riddled this with hints
Yeah.
about what's going to happen in our next episode. So you
Mhm,
just talk amongst
mhm.
yourselves and try to figure out where we dropped hints, where they were. No, I'm just kidding.
It's gonna be so epic. It's gonna be so epic, guys. We're gonna do a brand new podcast with all new material next time.
Well, RJ, thank you so much
Yeah.
for tuning in and hanging with me. This
Yeah,
was
man.
awesome.
Thank you.
This will, for anyone listening, this will come out tomorrow as a podcast. You guys will hear this, and then I think we're back next week for one final wrap up of Fish 2021 thus far on a weekly HF Pod standpoint. We will be back with. I think we're going to try to do some of these live shows in between here and MSG run, and then we'll kind of keep
Yep.
you all posted as HF Pod on Tour comes back. If you guys like it, like, comment on wherever you get your podcasts. Write to the podcasting guys, say that your gods say that you want HF Pod on Tour as a regular feature for you, and we'll see what we can do.
Could happen. It could
Could
happen.
happen.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks everybody for watching and listening.
Thank you, RJ. Travel safe. We'll talk soon.
All right, brother. Bye.